Welcome back, everybody, to The Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into a case that really makes you scratch your head.
Yeah, I know, right?
We've got witness testimonies, forensics reports, and even a handwritten manifesto. And at the center of it all is this murder suspect who seemingly went to extreme lengths to vanish, like completely disappear, only to then be caught with a ridiculous amount of evidence that directly ties him to the crime.
It's crazy.
I mean, it's almost as if he wanted to disappear and get caught all at the same time.
It's a real head scratcher. It's like, what is the real story here? What's going on?
Right. And that's exactly what we're going to try to figure out today.
Yeah, like we really have to dig deep into the evidence, try to get into the suspect's head, and try to understand what was going on.
Okay, so let's start unpacking this. First, we know that the victim was an executive in the healthcare industry. So this wasn't some random target, which right away suggests that this wasn't just a random act of violence.
Exactly, yeah. And then we have our suspect, Luigi Mangene, 26 years old, a graduate of UPenn with a master's in engineering, had ties to Towson, Philadelphia, and Honolulu. Seems like a pretty bright future, right?
Yeah,
and
yet here we are.
Yet he's at the center of this murder investigation.
Right, and I think what I find particularly perplexing is this contradiction between his actions. Like, on one hand, he evaded capture for days, suggesting careful planning and a desire to get away. But then he gets caught. And not just caught with a suppressor.
Right.
A fake ID that matches the one used at the crime scene, the mask from the surveillance footage.
Oh, wow.
The murder weapon itself, and then on top of all of that, a handwritten manifesto detailing his motives.
Yeah, the manifesto is really something. It says, "I do apologize for any strife or trauma, but it had to be done. These parasites had it coming."
It's chilling, that language.
It's chilling.
And you know what else is interesting? He uses the word parasites, right? So that's plural noun, but we think it was a single victim homicide.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point.
So what's that about?
Right. So it kind of makes you think that his anger wasn't directed only at the victim, but maybe at something bigger, maybe the entire healthcare industry. Who knows?
And it's interesting because when you look back at his past writings, his social media posts, you see this kind of distrust of corporate America.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he would go on these rants about, profiteering, exploitation of consumers. He really thought peaceful protest was useless.
Wow.
And seemed to believe that violence was the only way to make a real difference.
So then you have these two possible scenarios, right? Like maybe he wanted to get caught.
Okay.
Wanted to make sure that everybody knew that he was the only one responsible. Maybe he was protecting somebody else or just wanted to prevent, further investigation.
Like a martyr.
Yeah, like he's taken the fall for something he really believes in.
That's scenario one.
Yeah.
Okay, what about scenario two?
So, scenario two.
Yeah.
This was just a setback, He was planning to continue targeting other healthcare executives, other corporate figures. Maybe he was planning on releasing the manifesto later as, a big statement.
Like to accompany future attacks.
Exactly.
I mean, both of those scenarios are pretty disturbing.
Very disturbing.
But then there's another element to this case, right? We've got this ghost gun.
Yeah.
So for our listener, can you just break down what is a ghost gun and why does it matter in this case?
Yeah, so a ghost gun is a firearm that's assembled from parts. You can get them online. Sometimes they're even 3D printed. But the really important thing is that they don't have serial numbers. So it makes them almost impossible to trace.
Which I imagine makes them a total nightmare for law enforcement.
A total nightmare.
Because, the way I understand it, traditional firearm analysis really depends on matching the unique markings on bullets and shell casings to a specific firearm, right? Like that's how it's like a fingerprint for a gun. But with a ghost gun, that link is gone.
It's gone.
So you can't trace where it came from. You can't really easily connect it to other crimes.
It's like solving a puzzle, but half the pieces are missing.
Right. But does that mean all forensic evidence is useless in this case?
No, not at all. I mean, even though you can't really trace the history of the gun, you can still analyze bullets and shell casings and link the weapon that they found on Mangione to the crime scene.
Oh, okay.
And of course, there could be DNA or fingerprints on the gun itself.
Oh, right.
So it just makes the whole investigation a lot harder.
So to recap, we have this seemingly brilliant young man who seems to have been radicalized by his anti-establishment beliefs, who meticulously plans a murder using this untraceable weapon, but then gets caught with all of this evidence, including a manifesto that could be a confession or a declaration of war.
Right. It really makes you wonder, was him getting caught a mistake, or was it all part of some bigger, more disturbing plan?
And, if we zoom out a little bit, this whole thing really makes you think about those ghost guns becoming more and more accessible.
Yeah.
It just seems like it's going to make it harder and harder to track weapons and hold people accountable.
It's like a whole new world for criminal investigations, and I don't think law enforcement is ready for it.
And it makes you think, like, what's next, It just feels like technology is changing so fast, and sometimes the bad stuff is moving faster than our ability to control it.
That's for sure.
Okay, well, this has been a fascinating start to our deep dive into this case, and we'll be back after the break to continue our exploration.
It's just so crazy to think that someone with Luigi Mangioni's background could be driven to do something like this.
I know, it's hard to believe
Like, he could have been anybody, your neighbor, the guy you see at the coffee shop.
Exactly. It really makes you question your assumptions about who's capable of violence. This isn't the stereotype, This is a guy who is educated, had a good life. Right. So the question is, what happened? Was there something specific that set him off?
Yeah.
Or was this like a slow burn, a gradual descent into this radical mindset,
Well, if we go back to that manifesto, I think there are some clues. I mean, it's definitely full of anger and resentment, but there's also this weird sense of righteousness. Like, he really believes that what he did was right and that he was doing it for some greater purpose.
Yeah, and it's like that phrase, right? These parasites had it coming. It's meant to shock you, make you react. It's almost like he wanted to be understood or even admired for his actions, which is really creepy.
Yeah, it's really unsettling because it blurs the lines between like a personal vendetta and some kind of ideological extremism.
Yeah, we can't forget about that ghost gun.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's not just a weapon. It's like a symbol, right? It's like a symbol of defiance of operating outside the system.
Right. Like, think about the bigger picture. It raises all these questions about how crime is changing. These ghost guns are becoming more common, and that makes it so much harder to track weapons and hold people accountable.
Yeah, it feels like a whole new world for criminal investigations, and I'm not sure law enforcement is keeping up.
Yeah, traditional methods of tracing firearms just aren't as effective as they used to be. It's a whole different ballgame now. And it's not just about this case. This has implications for gun control, for public safety, for everything.
It's pretty sobering when you think about it. Like, technology is changing so fast, and sometimes it feels like the dark side of all of this is outpacing our ability to control it.
Yeah, I agree.
And we can't forget about the victims in all of this, I mean, in this case, it was a person, someone who died, a family that's now devastated.
It's true.
And it's easy to forget that behind the headlines, behind all the legal stuff and all the debates, there are real people whose lives have been shattered by this.
Absolutely. We have to remember that.
Okay, so I guess stepping back for a minute, what are the key takeaways for our listeners? What do we want them to walk away with after this deep dive?
I think the most important thing is to understand that radicalization can happen anywhere, to anyone. We need to be more aware of the signs, not just in other people, but in ourselves, too. Like, are we surrounding ourselves with people who just agree with us all the time? Are we in online communities that are just feeding these extreme views? Are we letting ourselves be consumed by anger and resentment? It's something we should all be thinking about.
That's a really good point. It's easy to get caught up in the anger and outrage, especially online, and forget to think critically about what we're seeing and hearing.
Exactly. And the second takeaway I would say is that we need to be having open and honest conversations about these difficult topics, and we need to be willing to challenge these harmful ideologies.
So basically, we shouldn't be afraid to have those difficult conversations, right? To question our own beliefs, our own biases.
Right. It's not about silencing people who disagree with us, but it's about hearing them out, understanding where they're coming from, and maybe finding some common ground.
It's about creating a space where different perspectives can be shared and debated in a healthy way, a space where we can learn from each other and hopefully prevent these kinds of tragedies from happening in the first place.
Exactly.
I think this case, with all its complexities and unsettling implications, forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we're living in.
Absolutely. It's a wake-up call.
Like, we need to be more vigilant, more informed, and more engaged. We want to create a safer and more just world.
100%.
So as we move into the final part of our deep dive, let's keep these things in mind. Let's keep asking those tough questions, and let's be open to different perspectives. Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground in this deep dive, right? We've looked at all the evidence, tried to figure out what his motives might have been, and talked about all the implications of these ghost guns.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's this one question that we keep coming back to.
Whether he wanted to get caught.
Yeah, like, did Luigi Mangione intentionally leave this trail of breadcrumbs leading right back to him? That's a pretty creepy thought.
For sure.
I mean, here's a guy who clearly planned his escape very carefully.
Right.
Yet he's caught with all this incriminating evidence.
Yeah. It's like he was shouting, "I did it."
Yeah, and if we think about that manifesto again,
Yeah.
there's almost like a theatrical quality to the language, right?
Yeah.
Like he's trying to create a narrative, trying to send a message.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Like that line, "These parasites had it coming." It's a phrase that's designed to get your attention, to make you feel something strong, to make you want to debate it, you know? It's almost like he wanted to make sure that his messed up reasoning wouldn't be ignored.
That's a good point.
So it really makes you wonder, was his goal to really escape? Or was it to make sure that his message, even though it's completely twisted, reached as many people as possible?
It's definitely a possibility.
Which is terrifying when you really think about it. Like,
Yeah.
what if getting caught was part of the plan all along?
I mean, it would make sense in a way. He could amplify his message, his anti-establishment views, and who knows, maybe even inspire other people to do the same thing.
And it just shows how complicated this case really is and how criminal motivations are changing, you know? We live in this world now where being infamous online can be a real motivator for people.
It's true.
And this case really shows that, you know. The digital age has blurred the lines between crime and spectacle.
Yeah.
It's not just about getting away with it anymore. It's about controlling how people see you, even if that means getting caught.
Well, this deep dive has been quite the journey.
Yeah.
We've really gone deep into some dark stuff today. The potential for radicalization, the appeal of these untraceable weapons, and the fact that getting arrested might actually be the goal for some people with extreme beliefs.
It's heavy stuff.
So what do we want our listeners to take away from all of this?
Right.
I think the most important thing is to be aware of how extremism can sneak up on us. It's not always obvious and it can happen to anyone. We need to be able to spot the warning signs, not just in other people, but in ourselves too.
So, like, pay attention to what we're consuming online, who we're surrounding ourselves with, right? And we should be challenging our own biases and really try to have those difficult conversations about all of this stuff.
That's really what it comes down to. This deep dive, it's just the beginning, really. We've only scratched the surface of this whole case.
Right.
We've asked a lot of questions, but we haven't really answered them all.
True.
But that's kind of how these deep dives work.
I guess it is.
It's all about constantly learning and trying to understand things better, and I think that's something we should all be doing.
So, to our listeners, keep digging into this case, keep researching all this stuff, and keep thinking critically about everything you see and hear.
Because it's on all of us to make the world a safer and more informed place.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time.